I hope CSN will go from strength to strength. I think the membership has grown about as much as we want it to, but we can start working with different organisations that are doing similar work in other parts of the world as well, because I'm sure a lot of the issues are going to be the same globally. I would like CSN to continue being a trusted source of information, a source of collaboration between national standards bodies, a way of helping, particularly developing low-income countries' national standards bodies and their whole quality infrastructure. I think there's scope for us to move further beyond just standards and look into wider aspects of quality infrastructure as well.
You are listening to The Standard Show, the podcast that brings you the stories behind the standards, with Matthew Childs and Cindy Parakill.
At least 80% of the Commonwealth is low and middle income countries. So ultimately, we would like to see these global and Commonwealth-wide changes where these lower and middle income countries use more international standards, and that we are able to measure direct impact from that for positive developmental outcomes.
Hello, my name is Matthew Childs and I am with
Cindy Parakill.
Hey Cindy Parakill, how are you?
Well, putting my shoulder to the wheel. How about you?
Nice. Trying to avoid going round in circles.
Aren't we all?
We are indeed. Well, I should say, welcome to The Standards Show, the podcast that brings you the stories behind the standards, and our regular monthly episode featuring the two of us at the same time.
At the same time? Different locations, obviously. Now, last month we did an update episode with CEN and CENELEC on the latest developments in European standards. And this month it's another C, but this time it's the CSN, or the Commonwealth Standards Network. And the voice you heard at the top of the episode was that of our colleague Ben Hedley from BSI. Ben is the Senior Programme Manager for the CSN, and he was responding to Cindy's question about what he thought people will be saying about the CSN in 5 years' time. Yes, we thought we should have another look at the CSN, given that it's been 6 years since it became part of the standards community, and 3 years since we covered it on the podcast. The last time was episode 28, way back in May 2021, where we told the story of the early days of the CSN. So this time, I chatted to Ben all about that look ahead to what people will be saying in 5 years' time, but also many other things, like the role of the CSN, how it interacts with other parts of the standards community, like COPANT, CENELEC, and other regional bodies in Africa and the Caribbean, and global bodies too, like ISO and IEC, and how it connects with trade bodies like the WTO. But perhaps most importantly, I spoke to him about how successful the CSN has been so far and the impact it has had.
So the CSN was created back in April 2018 and announced at the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting by the then UK Prime Minister Theresa May. And it was created with the aim of promoting strong trade amongst all Commonwealth states through the use of international standards. And alongside this, to empower developing countries to have a stronger voice in the international standards community.
It's worth reminding ourselves that the Commonwealth is quite a chunk of the world. It's a voluntary association of 54 countries and home to 2.4 billion people. 32 of the members are small states, including many island nations. The member governments have agreed to share common goals like development and democracy, and to honour the values and principles expressed in the Commonwealth Charter.
Now, before we hear Cindy's conversation with Ben, a reminder that you can rate, review and subscribe to The Standard Show wherever you get your podcasts. And you can get in touch and find and follow us on social media too. All the details are in the show notes.
The CSN aims to increase its members' technical and institutional capacity to use and participate in the development of international standards via existing international standards organizations such as ISO and IEC. And those international standards play an important role in promoting productivity and efficiency, reducing costs, removing barriers to trade,
and driving economic growth. So the CSN is especially relevant to national standards bodies from Commonwealth nations that are looking to boost their international trade capabilities. So I started by asking Ben about that core purpose of the Commonwealth Standards Network, supporting trade and economic growth.
The CSN is the Commonwealth Standards Network. It was established in 2018 as a collaborative network, so it's to support trade, economic growth and prosperity throughout the Commonwealth by promoting the increased awareness and development and use of international standards. So it's not creating any new standards at all. It's promoting the use primarily of ISO standards and also IEC standards for their positive developmental outcomes.
That's really interesting. Thanks for sharing that. So who are the members of the CSN network, and what kind of support do members gain access to?
The members, so it's grown very quickly, really. We're now up to 53 countries, CSN members, and 43 associations. So of the Commonwealth really covers pretty much the whole globe. We have people from North America, lots of Caribbean countries, lots of African countries, Asia and Australia, New Zealand and the Pacific as well. So it's a real geographical spread and a real spread of economies and needs of the national standards bodies as well. So usually the primary contact for us is the national standards body within a country. Some countries that will be a certain government ministry, but by and large it's the NSB, and it will be the NSB that you will see at places like the ISO meetings as well. And then the associations are basically organizations that are involved with standards or wider quality infrastructure and developmental work. Lots of the time they are people like the regional standards organizations like CrossQ for the Caribbean, ASO for Africa. And then also we work with ISO as well. We've worked with ISO on delivering good standardization practice audits before, and our annual meetings are always a side event of the ISO meeting. So we like to work closely with ISO and the capacity building work that ISO does, because really we're aiming for the same thing. We're promoting the use of these international standards because we know that they can give positive developmental outcomes. They can help people in many ways to either to achieve the sustainable development goals, maybe for specific product standards. We know the productivity gains that you can get from using them, safety gains, health and safety, environmental benefits. But also one of the big pushes has been how using the same international standards across different countries can reduce what we call technical barriers to trade. So where countries have got differing standards that they're using, it just adds one extra barrier when you want to trade between those countries. If you have to follow a standard within your country, then you have to follow another standard, and you maybe need to get certified to it as well. All of this is adding time and cost and adding barriers, which is not good for any consumers. And it also, we're looking a lot of the time to help these national standards bodies really to communicate this message to their stakeholders that standards are not they're an agreed way of doing something to help the end user usually, and so they're not really the burden that a lot of, say, SMEs would assume that they are. They're something that are widely used in higher income countries because people recognize the value of using these standards for their business, and likewise for governments as well, that standards can really be an important tool to help them achieve their policy objectives, to support regulations through standards. So it's really quite wide-ranging, the membership and the work that we do and who we work with. But generally it's NSBs, but then it's to help them have their conversations with all of their stakeholders as well.
Super. So it's basically promoting the idea of one standard used everywhere.
Exactly.
Super.
Yes.
And so you mentioned the members are national standards bodies. There are ISO members as well. But what about the non-members? Can non-members access the material that you produce? And what kind of material and collateral do you provide to support members in achieving the objectives that you outlined earlier?
Yes, it's not limited to the Commonwealth or to the Commonwealth members that we have. Certain parts are where the work is funded or has been funded since 2018 by the UK government, by the Foreign Commonwealth Development Office. So the focus is always on Commonwealth and particularly lower income, middle income Commonwealth countries. But it's such a diverse group of countries that the work is going to be relevant to other countries, other stakeholders as well. And so we don't limit the work. It's just when we're writing it, when we're delivering the presentations, the training, the workshops, it's focused for Commonwealth countries. So where we're going to actually work within the countries, where we in the past have delivered technical assistance programs, or where we're giving short-term training and workshops, they are always with Commonwealth countries. But what we increasingly do is we write documents that are relevant across the Commonwealth and beyond. And so where we've produced those documents, there's no barrier to stop anyone else seeing those documents and using them and using the training materials. Part of being a member means that you have a bit more say in which direction the work program goes in. You get invited to the CSN annual meeting. You're invited to comment on the drafts as they're getting written and to propose new ideas. But like I say, all of this is open to non-Commonwealth members as well. But generally, it's the Commonwealth members that receive the in-country assistance, particularly.
But how does the CSN interact with other parts of the standards community? For example, regional bodies like CENELEC in Europe or COPANT for the Americas. And then also in terms of international bodies like ISO and IEC, how does the CSN interact?
Yes, we try to, the CSN, as much as possible, we try to keep this as a collaborative organization that's working with all of these partners throughout the world. We don't want to reinvent the wheel with any of these things. We're really trying to communicate very similar messages to lots of these regional and international standards organizations. So people like the African Regional Standards Organization, ASO, and CrossQ for the Caribbean, and the Pacific Islands Forum as well for the Pacific are all members of the CSN. So they all have a say in our work program. And we work quite closely with them to deliver things like when we have delivered technical assistance, lots of that will be through these regional organizations. They have membership beyond the Commonwealth as well. And so it gives us a wider reach, and they are a good excellent conduit to get to all of these members and to tell them the work we're doing and how it can potentially benefit them. So we do work with all of those, and we also work with organizations like the WTO. We've worked with them on when we're talking about specifics of technical barriers to trade, and with ISO as well. I mentioned earlier, one of the things we did not too long ago was work with ISO to deliver good standardization practice audits. So then we can understand the needs of the national standards bodies and then design work programs around what these audits have said the needs are. And then we also work with Commonwealth organizations like the Commonwealth Enterprise and Investment Council, who run the Commonwealth Business Forum, which will take place in Samoa in October this year. So we're having a lot of discussions with them about having standards on the agenda for that, and the Commonwealth Head of Government meeting as well, standards and quality infrastructure and the importance of them. And the Commonwealth Secretariat is another grouping that we work closely with, because they do a lot of work on similar issues, not quite the standards focus, but on trade and regulation, digital access and things like that. So yes, we have a lot of partners. So it's useful, the 43 what we call associate members of CSN are these non-NSB members that we try to work closely with, all of them.
Standards affect all of us every day. Wherever we go, whatever we do. By defining good practice, they help people and organisations to do things better. Each year, standards bodies publish thousands of standards, and we are looking for more people, like you, to join our community of standards makers. We welcome applicants from all fields, backgrounds and career stages. Our goal is a simple one: to have a balance of views around the table. By becoming a standards maker, you could help to improve the way things are made and done, like creating healthier and more inclusive workplaces, developing higher quality healthcare systems, making advances in AI governance, or accelerating climate action. So if you want to make a difference and shape the world through standards, start your standards making journey now. Details of how to do so are in the show notes.
In your opinion, how successful has the CSN been? Impact is something that everyone wants to hear about. So could you unpack a little bit in terms of what the CSN has achieved since its creation back in 2018?
Sure, yes. I think since 2018, there was definitely a need for a program like this. It grew quickly. We have nearly every Commonwealth member as a member of the CSN. We, in a way, need to try to restrict how many people we have as associate members now, just so the grouping doesn't get so diverse that we can't manage it at all. So there's a lot of demand for the work that we have done. One of the clear success stories was the technical assistance aspects of the CSN. When it was launched, there were 3 separate streams. There were one in Africa, one in Caribbean, and one in Oceania. And each of those worked with a selection of national standards bodies like Uganda, Zambia, Rwanda in Africa, working with their NSBs to help with specific things that they needed as an NSB, not the overarching aspects. And that work continued into a second phase of work and has now actually sort of evolved into what is now called the Standards Partnership, which is a UK government funded sister program to the CSN, where they are purely dealing with technical assistance on country by country or sometimes regional basis. And something we've been doing with that is the CSN is now looking at the overarching Commonwealth-wide aspects. So recently we did work on gender responsive standards, why they're important, this messaging going out to different CSN members and NSBs, but then the Standards Partnership used that work and focused it in on specific countries and regions to then deliver specific in-country training and workshops. So I think that's a useful way and something that we plan on doing more in future is the CSN will look at these overarching things like digital trade, how that's becoming an issue, the digital divide, how we can reduce that, maybe impact analysis of what the work NSBs are doing, sustainability, and a lot that we're working on is participation, increasing participation in committees, ISO committees, and then standards partnership, working on that more focused level of taking this work and applying it to country specific case-by-case studies. So there's a lot of case studies we've got from the technical assistance where I think it can be split roughly into 3 groups. It's where we're working with the NSBs to help their business case, their business model, and help them be more self-sufficient. And we've got lots of examples of where we've helped with that. Things like helping with the online platforms that the NSBs are using so that they can sell more services, more standards. Things like increasing the standards catalogue of national standards bodies, small national standards bodies, doing mapping of what their stakeholders need, what they have on the catalogue, and increasing that so that they have more services, more standards to offer to their stakeholders. And also the working with businesses, particularly SMEs, maybe people in farming and fishing in Africa. We did quite a lot who are not the usual market for using standards, but we can, in various different ways, promote the use of standards, maybe through simplification and translation of those standards. So, and the other aspect is working actually with the government. So it's working on national standardization strategies and trying to communicate the need for standards to support policy decisions within countries. And that has actually been signed and has taken place in a number of countries, particularly in the Caribbean. That's something that we did. So I think really in 3 separate things, it's working with businesses to show why standards are good, working with the NSBs to help their business models, working with policymakers to show how they can use standards, or at the technical assistance level, and then at the overarching CSN wide publications, we've got a big library now of different resources that cover basically those sort of topics. We've got e-learning courses, we've got publications, webinars, different online content on the Commonwealth Standards Network online portal, a forum where people can collaborate and ask questions and get responses from other CSN members. I think all of these things have it's really taken off, and there's a real demand for it around the world. I think going forward with it, something we're going to continue looking at all of those things, the network engagement, continue to support the membership over those key themes. I think something that's going to be useful to the members that we're going to increasingly look at is impact analysis. So not just the impact of CSM, but the impact of standards as a whole and the impact of national standards bodies. So they can communicate this to SMEs, or they can communicate it to their governments of this is really this thing that's quite intangible a lot of the time, but everyone sort of assumes that standards have all of these positive benefits, but how can we really tangibly show these and help NSBs sell that case to their stakeholders? So I expect that's something that we're going to be looking at quite a lot more over the next couple of years.
Ben, you mentioned digital trade and the digital divide being a priority area that you're looking into. Are there any other topics that you'll be exploring as part of the CSN?
I think as well as we will keep a focus on standards as a tool to support trade, to reduce technical barriers to trade, and digital is obviously going to continue growing as something where there's a potential for digital divide, and lower income countries will require support. So that will continue. Sustainability is always high up the agenda, and something we've found is that not just CSM members, but low and middle income countries around the world are less represented in international standards development, which runs the risk of potentially the standards not being written by them not having such a say in what their content is, and them not being so relevant to them. There may be gaps within the standards if they're not participating in them, and they're probably less likely to use those standards within that country as well. So really trying to understand the barriers to participation and the drivers to participation. Why do certain stakeholders and countries participate at the levels they do? What are the arguments for doing this? How can we help other countries participate more and get the benefits that other countries that do a lot of participation are obviously seeing? So I think sustainability, digital trade, and impact analysis are three quite key areas. One thing that's interesting that I think will become part of a CSM work program is looking at nature investment standards, and another thing is access to finance as well. So how if you were in a low-income country, you have limited access to finance from big global financial institutions, you can't get good credit. Partly this is because you can't demonstrate what your business is doing. You need to build trust through the use of standards, and international standards particularly are a good way of doing this, that we'll see countries in higher income countries are using these standards, but it's not the case in lower income countries. So there's a real gap there, and I think there's a real opportunity to promote the use of pre-existing standards that can help stakeholders in lower income countries gain access to good quality finance as well. So I think they're probably the key things that we'll be looking over the next few years, and working more. We'll continue to work with the Standards Partnership as well to try and embed these things at a ground level where they're working with NSBs for specific focused capacity building efforts.
Looking ahead, what will we be saying about the CSN in another 5 years' time?
I hope CSN will go from strength to strength. I think the membership has grown about as much as we want it to now, but we can start working with different organisations that are doing similar work in other parts of the world as well, because I'm sure a lot of the issues are going to be the same globally. I would like the CSN to continue being a trusted source of information, a source of collaboration between national standards bodies, a way of helping, particularly developing low-income countries' national standards bodies and their whole quality infrastructure. I think there's scope for us to move further beyond just standards and look into wider aspects of quality infrastructure as well. Ultimately, about at least 80% of the Commonwealth is low and middle income countries. So ultimately, we would like to see these global and Commonwealth-wide changes where these lower and middle income countries use more international standards, and that we are able to measure direct impact from that for positive developmental outcomes.
Our thanks to Ben Hedley for sharing with us some of the latest developments for the Commonwealth Standards Network. Now, if you want to discover more about the CSN and about how to get involved in standards, then check out the links in the show notes. And a reminder that the show notes are also where you can find details of our socials and all the other ways to get in touch with us here on The Standard Show.
You have been listening to an episode of The Standard Show, the podcast that brings you the stories behind the standards, with Matthew Childs and Cindy Paragill.
You just heard a Stripped Media production.